So this week marks the 50th anniversary of the historic Attica prison riot in upstate New York, and the remnants of that rebellion continue to really impact us today.
So with everything that's happening in our own backyard over at Rikers, we couldn't let this anniversary pass without speaking to prison reform advocates about the lessons that were learned from Attica. So we are joined right now by Soffiyah Elijah. She's the executive director of the Alliance of Families for Justice. So good morning to you, Soffiyah. Thank you so much for being here.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So we know that Attica is a maximum security prison, right? It's near Rochester. But what happened in 1971 really had a ripple effect on prisons across the country. So why was this such a pivotal event?
It was important because what was happening in Attica was happening across the country. The inhumane conditions under which people who were incarcerated were being held were unbearable. And finally, the men in Attica literally put their lives on the line to speak out and demand that their human rights not be violated and that they be treated like human beings. Basic things like toilet paper and educational programs and decent food. These were the kinds of things that the men stood up and demanded that they receive.
Yeah, the Attica riots really spawned the modern-day prison reform movement, if you will. So when we look at those lessons that were learned and we look at the situation today, especially a lot of eyes on Rikers right now, what have we learned and how can it be used in that situation?
Well, I hope that we've learned that we must treat people like human beings. There's no benefit to putting people in cages and treating them inhumanely. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem that those lessons have been learned at Rikers and jails and prisons across the country. But we have to hear what people's concerns are with respect to how they're being treated and treat people humanely. People go to prison as punishment, not for punishment. And there's no reason to treat them inhumanely during their incarceration.
So did the state, I guess, ever apologize to families of those that, because people lost their lives during those riots?
39 people were murdered by the troopers who were brought in to retake the prison, and no, the state of New York has yet to apologize to the families of those people who were murdered.
The demands that were made by the prisoners, though, in Attica, still really a goal for advocates like yourself some 50 years later. Did you think 50 years later you would still be fighting for some of these same things?
50 years later, we are still fighting for some of these same things. Yes, people get more than one roll of toilet paper. There's still no air conditioning in any of the prisons in New York State. Educational programs improved for a while, but now there's only a few seats available for higher educational opportunities in the various prisons in New York State, and they're not available in all of the states. Idle time is a major problem. Yeah. Medical care is a joke.
So I guess the question for me is why, right? Why haven't things not really evolved or changed from 50 years ago, especially as we look at the Riker situation now, right? What do you think is the driving force for things not changing?
I think there's two things. One, as a society, we tend to forget about and ignore people who are incarcerated and to marginalize them. Another driving factor is race. Black and brown people are disproportionately targeted by the criminal and justice system at every stage, and people who are incarcerated disproportionately are Black and brown. And as a society, the society doesn't care what happens to them and their families. And I think those are the reasons that we've seen little to no change.
Quickly, is there a misconception? Because I think some people will view this as, you know, look, it could be a country club-like situation where people are getting degrees. They were fighting their own legal justice systems, trying to, you know, get exonerated for things. So they do have the resources that we're saying, no, is still lacking even today.
The resources are definitely lacking. If people think it's a country club, I would invite them to go visit any prison in New York State, and they will be quickly educated that there's no country club setting in any of them. The conditions are horrible.
Yeah, and
the lack of heat, etc. I mean, I could go on and on.
Yeah, we even saw the lack of heat last winter. One of the jails, prisons in Lower Manhattan that had a heat issue, and they were banging on the windows saying, "Please help us in here." Thank you so much for your continued efforts and for being here this morning to talk about it.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely.